Symposium. So that is an event that's happening in South Africa on the 9th of May. So it's 9 to 13. And it's going to be a 5-day clinic that's going to help bring education and biomechanics to the ridden world. I find that we're quite often based on tradition, which is not always biomechanically sound information. And so if we can find a way to really help our horses by helping ourselves and helping our understanding of how we put out information, then it can really influence our performance or in whatever discipline and whatever area you want to focus on with your horses. So this event is just going to be a really cool way to get involved with new resources. And Amanda is going to be one of our trainers on the symposium. She'll be doing she'll be doing her demo on day one. And then on the next 4 days, she'll be doing group workshops where she'll go in depth on functional saddle fit and how anatomy and your biomechanics changes or affects your horse's performance. So this is going to be your intro session to the whole thing, and I'm super excited that you're here. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I saw a couple of comments popping up below. I'm going to start my presentation, and Haley is going to deal with like some of the tech stuff. So if you have a question or whatnot, then she will be answering that. I
Sorry,
unmute. Oh, can you guys hear me?
we can.
Okay, so my presentation is condensed from 5 days into less than an hour. So I want to give you guys a kind of a very brief overview of what we're going to go through. Of course, this includes a ton of anatomy and biomechanics and saddle design. And so I'm going to talk very, very fast. And we hope that you will join us in South Africa because this is going to be very fast, but in South Africa, we are going to get very deep into anatomy, biomechanics, and saddle design. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And if anyone has a problem hearing me, seeing this, Haley, I need you to manage that, please, so that I can just zip. All right, here we go. Share, present. All right. So welcome to How to Win at Saddle Fitting. My name is Amanda Anderson. You guys just get buckled up because this is going to be very, very fast and very intensive. So if you're crying, that's fine. Just mute your microphones, please. All right. So my name is Amanda Anderson. My background is in functional medicine. I have a master's of science in that, and I was an acupuncture physician. I did an apprenticeship in Germany for 3 years with a saddle maker. I've got certifications from about 20 courses in 3 countries. I stalk Henry Cavill. You're going to see him quite often in this presentation. I started really getting into horse welfare when I realized that the saddle industry is not getting better. We're actually getting worse. With all of the technology and everything that we know and have, why are we running into so many problems? And so I really started focusing on horse welfare in the saddle industry, and that brought me to the anatomy. And then, which was bolstered by, I am a necropsy technician for Rexos Incorporated here in North Carolina. We do research on horses that are too painful to live. They come to us, we study them, and then sometimes they get euthanized and they get put on the necropsy table. So it's also a rehabilitation. We always try to rehabilitate horses first, but doing all the necropsies has really influenced my views on saddle fit, which we're going to be talking about today. Okay. And so I'm also a fitter training specialist for a couple of brands. I come into different brands and I will teach them anatomy and how it relates to saddle fit so that we can all get on the same page as far as what the horse needs to be comfortable. Because it is our ethical responsibility to saddle horses so they stay mentally, physically, and emotionally sound throughout their lives. Because otherwise, what are we doing, right? I mean, horses are sentient beings, and it's our responsibility to treat them correctly. Unfortunately, the industry thrives on confusion and opinions. And this is truly what set me on the road to learning anatomy, because in the course of my trainings with German saddlers, UK saddlers, and some US based saddle schools, I noticed that the anatomy was very sparse and there was a lot of opinions and people were fitting saddles differently. I don't have a problem with people fitting saddles differently, but I do have a problem with the consumers getting different opinions on the same fit, on the fit of the same saddle on the same horse. And that creates a lot of confusion. We shouldn't be confused about how the saddle fits the horse and how the saddle fits the rider, because it really boils down to anatomy and biomechanics. And so what ends up happening is we are at kind of a precipice right now in the industry. Saddle fitters are not well trusted. All you have to do is go online to any forum, and you will see that people are having a bad time with saddle fitting. And most of it is because they're just confused. And they're confused because it's kind of the Wild West. I know, like, the UK's got a guild, but they are not in line with anyone else. And everyone is giving their opinions, but nobody really knows the facts. And when I started the necropsies, I realized that the anatomy that I learned in the saddle schools was actually not correct. And the reason why that is we pretty much stopped doing dissections in the late 1800s, and we were making the anatomical illustrations that everyone seems to use based on those. We've done a ton of selective breeding since then. And as you'll see a little bit in this presentation, and so much more when we go through it in South Africa, anatomy has changed, and it is very much affecting how we should be designing saddles, how we should be sitting on the horses, how we should be riding the horses, and how we should be teaching saddle fitters. And so my very favorite book, my Bible, is Animal Management 1933. At the end of this, if someone, Haley, if you'll remind me, I will give you a link to this. It is free online on, I think it's archives.org. If you just type in Animal Management 1933, it should pop up in the archives as a free download. And so this is the number one quote: the basis for prevention of injuries from saddles can only be laid down by a knowledge of anatomy. Everything else is guesswork. Okay. With the frequency of injury enormously increased by ignorance and lack of education. So the picture you see is a 5-star rider. And I mean, anyone with 2 eyes can see that this saddle is sitting right on the horse's withers. And so, as an educator, as a saddle fitter, and our top riders, like every one of us that has the ability, we need to be raising the bar for saddle fitting. What you see is unacceptable in this picture, and you're going to learn why anatomically, because this is extremely detrimental to the horse's welfare. And so if when everybody comes up to the same level and goes, hey, wait a minute, we really have to start focusing on the horse's welfare, then the saddle companies are going to have to change. And that's what I want this industry to do, is to change for the better of the horse. All right, so why do we need to know anatomy? Anatomy quantifies saddle fit, right? Without it, everything is guesswork. When we can quantify something, we take the opinion out of it, and it gets very black and white. Sure, there is some gray area in there, but the gray area is really only the horse's opinion. Everything else can be measured and quantified. All right. When you know anatomy, it's going to help you determine whether or not a particular saddle or piece of tack is a problem, or if the issue is deeper, right? So test it, or imaging and testing and stuff for the horse is quite expensive. It's much easier for us to go in and be like, okay, the saddle's a problem or the saddle isn't a problem. But if you don't know anatomy and you don't know the correct anatomy, this becomes an opinion. And so anatomy will give you the tools to find that out, right? This will reduce the cost for the rider and improves the outcome for the horse, and it prevents decision fatigue for the rider, right? We all know riders who are struggling with issues with their horse. They can't find out the problem, and then they finally just give up and keep riding, and then the horse suffers. We don't want that. And so the step one that we always do is we find anatomic fit for the horse. The step two is we find the biomechanical fit for the rider, and then they come together in harmony. And then in that way, we have the best success in saddle fitting, which means you're going to have happier clients. You as a saddle fitter, you as a rider, you as a vet, and you as a body worker, it's going to increase your confidence and your client's confidence in you, which is super important, especially if you're saying the right thing and you know your anatomy. Right now in the industry, there is a ton of people who don't really know, and they're super confident, and people have a lot of confidence in them, but they're also saying things that aren't correct. So, all right, so also professional responsibility. Anyone that deals with a horse, it's our professional responsibility to do what is best for them. As a saddle fitter, your scope of practice is just the saddle, right? And so you need to know, and tack, but you need to know what you're recommending and the risks and the rewards and the pros and the cons. And you need to educate the rider so they can make the best decision for their horse. And it all comes down to, where do we want to sit on the horse's back? Because saddle fitting is riding, right? We sit on their backs. And so all of anatomy is answering the question, where do we want to sit and how do we want to sit? And to do that, we need to know anatomy. All right, so we're about to get into it, so buckle up, guys. Haley, are we doing good on questions or anything?
We're doing really good.
Okay. All right. We're going to get started then. All right. So first things first, the spine. The spine houses the central nervous system and connects the axial and appendicular skeletons, right? It connects the body to the legs. And so the central nervous system is really important. That's your spinal cord and your brain. And so the spinal cord obviously runs through the spine. And so that means that the health of the back determines the health of the entire body. Okay. What do we ride? We ride the back. Okay. We don't ride the spine, but the saddle sits and affects the spine. And so often I'll go out and I'll see a horse that has a lot of back pain. And maybe the saddle fits and maybe it doesn't. And I will say, hey, we have got to get the vet out and we've got to treat the back. And the vet will come out and the vet will go, okay, I'll do some flexion. We'll flex them and we will trot them in a straight line on concrete. And that will tell us, whatever that's going to tell us. And that's awesome. But if the horse has back pain, potentially due to the saddle, potentially due to being ridden in circles on uneven ground with a rider that may or may not be unbalanced, that is not going to tell us, flexion test and running on a straight line with no weight and no saddle is not going to tell us how the saddle and the rider are affecting the spine. So we need to really start focusing as saddle fitters, riders, veterinarians, and body workers on the health of the back. And there's a ton of confusion, again, because I don't know if you guys have seen the internet stuff, but there's a ton of people out there who are going, oh, these 5-star horses with obviously terrible backs are healthy. And that's not the case. Okay, so human versus horse. No matter what we do, the saddle, when we put the saddle on a horizontal structure, meaning the spine, the saddle always places vertical pressure on that spine. So therefore, it will always depress the spine. Okay. So this is why we have to start first with a horse that has a healthy back, good posture, and proper fitness. Because if the horse does not start with those three, oh, and also muscle, proper muscling, then when the saddle depresses the spine and we put a rider on, then we're going to be in a world of trouble. Okay. And so also we need to consider that the rider's weight, balance, position in the saddle, and symmetry, whether or not they can sit centered, will dramatically affect saddle fit and the horse's posture. You can imagine carrying a backpack, a heavy backpack, that's 20% of your weight in, repetitive circles when you're getting tired, uneven surface. It is absolutely going to affect how you carry your body. The horse must be able to move evenly in order to prevent issues happening in their body. All right. So this is going to go to where do we want to sit? All right. So what you're looking at is the thoracic spine. You can see on the left of the screen is the start of the withers. That's T2. And so you can see that the spinous processes, which are the finger-like projections sticking up here, incline towards the tail, towards the right side of the screen. And the spinous processes from T16 to 18 incline towards the left of the screen, meaning cranially. And so T14 or T15, we call it the anticlinal vertebrae, meaning it has no incline. It's straight up and down. And so when you guys are think about like architecture, when you see an arch, okay, you'll see the bricks and they are going up in an arch and they curve in toward each other. And then you've got your keystone, and that's the strongest one, and that keeps the whole arch together. And so this area has been theorized, the T14 or T15, the anticlinal vertebrae, that is the strongest place for the rider to sit. Now, it might be hard to imagine with just this thoracic spine here, but if you hopped on your horse bareback, where you sit is the base of the withers, where this anticlinal vertebrae is. That's going to be very important in a little bit when we talk about where we're going to place the rider. All right. So now let's get into the spine. This is an x-ray of broken withers. And so we know that the entire spinous process can cause pain, right? So like this horse has pain quite low because the ends of the bone are grating on each other. And this is where the confusion starts to come in. When we look at people who are asking for saddle fitting advice, when we look at books that for saddle fitting advice, all of these pictures, everyone is just focused on the top. Everyone is focused so much on making sure that the very top of the pommel clears the very top of the spine. But the reality is, as we saw back here, these spinous processes can hurt much lower. And so any weight on the top of the spine is going to put weight on the entire spinous process. Okay, so when we look at wither clearance, it has to be so much more than just your 2 or 3 or 4 fingers of wither clearance at the very top. It's got to be on the sides as well. So the book Animal Management 1933 states that the entire spinous process is non-weight bearing, and any pressure from the saddle or a half pad, okay, will cause inflammation in a very short amount of time. So no part of the spine, including the entire spinous process, is weight bearing. And so when we're talking about this, we're going to start talking about your pommel, your tree points, your panel attachment, your panel taper, and what type of half pad that we need to use to provide ample room for the tops and sides of those spinous processes. Okay, so again, for this, here's a pommel that's providing plenty of room on the top and the sides. And people get a bit freaked out. I know that a lot of people who don't understand saddle fitting quite a lot, they see a saddle that's got a lot of wither clearance and they think that the saddle is too narrow. This is not always the case, and this is something that we will go into in depth in South Africa. I also go into it in depth on my Social media, you're welcome to peruse my social media. I run saddlefitting.us. And so the entire top and sides of the withers must be free from any pressure from the saddle and half pad. And when I say pressure, I mean the slightest pressure. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, but I want to get that very, very clear. Using a half pad that doesn't have a gullet channel, the same exact width of your saddle's gullet channel, will crowd the pommel and the gullet channel of the saddle and cause your saddle to pinch the sides of the spine, right? So you can see in this picture, the yellow would be your half pad with no gullet channel. And you can see how on the very sides of the spine, which would be the sides of the spinous processes and the sides of the withers, how we are now pinching this. So your half pad choices need to include and make sure that your pommel and gullet channel are not crowded. Okay, so now we move into the number one rule of saddle fitting. When a saddle is placed on the back, it rests on the ribs. It is on the ribs and not the spine that the weight is actually carried. Okay, this is the basis for all saddle fitting. Okay, and so when we get into where can we put this saddle, you see the ribs in blue. Any muscle that is not associated with the rib cage and a very specific area of the rib cage cannot bear weight. And so basically we've got three muscles, two major ones, that you can only put the saddle on, the latissimus and the longissimus. We're going to get into those in a little bit. Any muscle that is attached to the scapula is non-weight bearing, which means all the muscles in the withers, save for the spinalis, are non-weight bearing. And what you can see is you'll see the scapula on the left side of the screen. And so that scapula is not weight bearing. We put the tree point behind the scapula, right? And so I assume everyone knows what a tree point is. You guys can quick Google it. We'll get into that a little bit later, but your pommel is designed to get around the spine, and your tree point, which is the metal bar that comes out of the pommel, has to be long enough to reach the rib cage. What do you see right where the tree point goes? The rib cage is curving down to the base of the neck. The most distance between the top of the spine and the rib cage, right, where we put the saddle, where we put the tree point, that's a lot of distance. And so it's important, because the tree is what distributes the weight of the saddle, that your tree and your tree point is long enough to reach the muscles that can support the weight, the latissimus and longissimus. All right. So now we're going to get into what is like the types of ribs. The true ribs, T1 through 8, right? So there's 18 thoracic vertebrae here that are featured. And the true ribs are the ones that have an almost direct attachment to the sternum. Okay. And the top here where it says tree points, you see this is a true rib. Do you see how vertical they are? Almost up and down. And then as we move back to the cantle, you see the much rounder ribs. These are the false ribs. The false ribs have a much longer cartilage to go to the sternum. And I'm going to tell you why in just a sec. All right. So the true ribs, T1 through 8, they are very, very stout and they're very straight. If you like short ribs, if you like to eat short ribs, this is what you're eating. You're eating the true ribs. These are unique because only the true ribs can carry weight on their upper surface as well as the side. And what I want you to know is how vertical, like how up and down these true ribs are. This is incredibly important because many people say that, oh, you can't have a tree point that's too long. We need to use a short tree point because it'll poke into the ribs. Well, the tree point goes on the true ribs, and man, unless you're riding a rhinoceros or a propane tank, these ribs are very vertical. And we need to distribute the weight of the front of the saddle, which includes the weight of the stirrup bar and basically half of the rider's weight. We've got to keep it off of the withers, and we've got to get it wrapped around onto the rib cage We don't want pressure straight down. We want it around the sides of the horse, like a nice hug, right? Instead of someone like sticking their thumb in the top of your neck. That's never going to be comfortable. Okay, so the tree points can be as long as necessary to get to the rib cage. When we start moving back to the false ribs, things change. Okay, what I want you to notice between the two, these false ribs are smaller and they're much more curved. And I'm going to flip back so you can see the true ribs one more time. See how stout that is and upright and vertical? Okay, so now we're going to move to the false ribs. The false ribs, which are T9 through 18, are thinner, very curved, and highly mobile. Okay, they're very mobile because they have to move so that the horse can breathe, right? So horses are belly breathers. They've got to expand those false ribs so that they can expand their rib cage. Expand the rib cage and expand their diaphragm so they can take a deep breath. Okay, so we can only put weight on the upper surface of these ribs. This is going to become really important when we learn about the iliocostalis. So keep that in mind. The ribs become progressively weaker as we go from T8 to T18. So T9 is weaker than T8, T10 is weaker than T9, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is going to become important when we talk about where do we want to sit, which I've touched on a little bit. We want to sit as close as possible to the true ribs. That is the anticlinal vertebrae. That is the base of the withers. There's quite a lot of dressage saddles out there, which you'll see in a little bit, that are setting the riders really far back. And this is super problematic for the horse because if the further back we get, T18, which is the last rib, is actually what we call a floating rib because it attaches into T17, right? So, and it is extremely, extremely thin. So that's my hand. And sorry for the necropsy photos, get ready because there's plenty of them. The bigger rib on the left side of the screen is T17 and the smaller rib is T18. And I mean, that thing is much thinner than my pinky finger. And so we don't want to set the rider on that primarily. We want to get them much closer. Okay. And so one of the things we're going to talk about, I know you can read this here. This is a note. Should the rider's weight have any influence past T18? We are breeding horses with really, really short backs, and that's a problem. And unfortunately, riders are generally, like humans, are not getting smaller. We're all getting bigger. And so that's a question that we need to pose to saddle fitters and have an honest conversation between saddle fitters, saddle makers, and riders and breeders. Is like, we're coming into a problem where we are not able, we're either shoving riders in too small of seats, which means they're unbalanced and the horse is uncomfortable, or we're putting a rider in a too big of a seat for the horse's back and they're uncomfortable. And so that's one of the things we're going to chat about in South Africa. Okay, nuchal ligament. I feel like everybody should know this. Nuchal means pertaining to the neck. There's two portions, the funicular portion and the lamellar portion. One of the things you should notice here, even though this is just an illustration, it's a very good one, that C5, 6, and 7 do not have a lamellar attachment, a lamellar portion attaching this lower vertebrae, these lower vertebrae to the funicular portion. This is a huge problem because the most mobile part of the horse's neck is C7 to T1. And where are we seeing ECVM, which is the equine complex vertebral malformations, which is now a very, very hot topic? What we're finding in necropsies and imaging and generally what the researchers are finding is that approximately 30% of performance horses have it, which is C6 and can affect C7 and T1. We have bred the nuchal ligament out of C5, 6, and 7. It is theorized, this is just what I've heard, is that because we started breeding horses with hypermobility and ease of bending and all that stuff, that the nuchal ligament has disappeared. If you look at old books and even some new ones, it will show that the nuchal ligament attaches to all of them. It no longer does. I have done 60 plus necropsies on various horses in the last couple of years. In various horses, I mean quarter horses, Spanish horses, thoroughbreds, performance horses, warm bloods, you name it. exactly 0 of them have had a nuchal ligament attachment to 5, 6, or 7. Sharon May Davis comes to our Denali. She also says the same thing. Audrey DeClue, same thing. So we have an issue here, and that absolutely is going to affect how we fit saddles in the future. This is an necropsy photo. The head would be to the left, the cervical vertebrae here in the middle. That is the nuchal ligament, and you can see how 5, 6, and 7 are hanging out. Now, I don't have time. It's 12 o'clock. I cannot get into all of the evolutionary concerns, but we suspect that we're having major issues with the thoracic sling because we have bred this nuchal ligament out. That is another thing that we will absolutely get into in South Africa in a lot of depth. Basically, check your sources. When you're studying anatomy, it is no longer okay to use basic, like what you're seeing here, like an illustration. We have to do anatomy book, or sorry, dissection manuals. At the end, I will give you a good dissection manual reference that is contemporary, up to date, because again, like I said, we had all of our illustrations for the most part have been from old stuff. They've been copied over and copied over and copied over, and we've got to use the new stuff now. Okay, supraspinous ligament is a continuation of the nuchal ligament. We call it the supraspinous ligament when it hits T3 because then it starts running along the top of the dorsal spinous processes, right? So supra means above and spinous means spine. Okay, so basically what this means is there is no localization of injury in the horse. Injury to the nuchal ligament affects the supraspinous ligament, which affects the spine. And so this ligament from the nuchal to the supraspinous is responsible for stabilizing the dorsal spinous processes, okay? And is the attachment for back muscles, right? What do we set the saddle on? Back muscles. Any injury to that, meaning if your saddle's too wide, right, and that steel gullet bar is hitting the supraspinous ligament, you are affecting the horse's entire body because this ligament runs from the pole to the pelvis. And so it is so incredibly important that we are understanding and getting it right. Okay, so what you're seeing here is my hand, and I have made a cut. I've just cut the skin. The white stuff with a little bit of blood is connective tissue. And then where I've got the label supraspinous ligament, you can see a darker yellow. The supraspinous ligament is extremely superficial. So any type of pressing from that pommel onto the spine, you are going to damage this. It's like, have you ever walked into a desk, like a desk with your shin, because your tibia is right there on the surface? Now imagine a steel gullet bar that's held down by a girth and a rider posting hitting your tibia over and over. That's exactly what it feels like. All right, so now we're going to move into joints. All right. A joint is just a structure of the body where two bones connect and allows movement. Some joints have more movement than others. We'll get into joints. We'll get into the SI joints in South Africa. We're going to get into the scapulohumeral joint, all that stuff. Basically, for today, you need to understand that if the horse's back is unhealthy, the joints suffer because the back controls how well the horse can move. And like this old lady here, when the back hurts, you move unevenly. And when we move unevenly, we load joints unevenly. They get abnormal wear. We start having arthritis. We start breaking down faster, right? Horses are suicidal and homicidal, usually, mostly suicidal. And so we don't need to increase the chances of them getting hurt. All right, scapula. I feel like everyone should know what a scapula is. It is a fan-shaped bone unique to herbivores, right? So horses, moose, elk, bovines, all of the herbivores have a cartilaginous cap up here. And the cartilaginous cap is what we are, very much concerned about when we talk about saddle fitting. We are going to discuss a landmark on the medial surface of the scapula here. All right, so I'm just going to show you. This is the lateral surface of the scapula, like the actual scapula bone with the scapular cartilage. I'm going to flip over here. And what you're seeing is the medial surface, meaning it faces to the interior of the horse. The upper part of that is your scapular cartilage. You can see how big it is. And then what's listed, it's called the fascia serrata. And that's on this bone. It's where the clean space is. It's where the red meat is gone. This is a landmark for your serratus muscles. It's so, so important biomechanically. You can see that this landmark is right up where the bone turns into cartilage. And as we're going to discuss here in just a few minutes, the serratus, serratus cervicus and the serratus thoracis, your primary muscles of the thoracic sling. Okay. Biomechanically, it anchors the dorsal scapula close to the body and prevents movement. There are a ton of ads for shims, girths, saddles, options, all of the things that show the scapula moving like a windshield wiper. Or if you guys have ever seen Forrest Gump when he was like waving to Lieutenant Dan and his arm was going like crazy, the scapula does not move like Forrest Gump. It moves like the queen waving at a parade. It's got a queen wave because right here on this fascia serrata, the dorsal scapula is anchored by the serratus muscles. Okay. So very, very important to remember. All right. I'm just going to take a quick break before we get to the thoracic sling. Haley, we doing okay?
All good.
Haley?
All good.
All good. Okay. Perfect. All right. All right. So thoracic sling, if we're talking about the scapula, we have to talk about the thoracic sling because that is the mechanism that holds the scapula onto the body, holds the forelimb onto the body. When I do a necropsy, it takes me exactly 1 minute with a 22 scalpel, which is not very big, to completely remove the forelimb from the body. 1 minute. It takes me over 10 minutes to disarticulate a hock or a stifle. And I usually break one of the scalpels, kind of comes on my klutz, and I get super I get bored doing it. But it takes so much longer to disarticulate like a hock or a stifle or a fetlock or whatever. 1 minute to cut that shoulder off. And that's very, very important because the horses don't have a clavicle. And so they rely on a system of opposing muscles that helps balance and hold the scapula onto the body and the forelimb too. And so we know that the horse has 60% of its weight on its forelimbs. Now, imagine when those muscles are unequal in development, right? One of the scapulas is further back. One of the scapulas is protruding. The other one's held closely to the body. That means the horse is not moving evenly, right? Now we're into asymmetry. When we have asymmetry, we have abnormal loading of the joints. When we have abnormal loading of the joints, we get arthritis. We get uneven muscles, right? So this is what we're trying to prevent. When we talk about a healthy horse, the muscles of the thoracic sling, which are going to be cervical and thoracic trapezius, cervical thoracic rhomboids, ascending, descending pectoralis, cervical and thoracic serratus. So what you'll notice is all of these muscles have a cervical and thoracic component, right? Because they are designed to balance and oppose. They balance the shoulder by opposing each other. And so what makes that important is that the cervical trapezius and the thoracic trapezius must be equal in size and strength to each other in order to oppose each other, and equal in size and strength to their components on the opposite side in order to create symmetry throughout the entire body. So when we talk about asymmetry, I know people go, oh, asymmetry is very normal. Sure, it's normal to a certain extent, okay? If you look at someone's face, if you look at your face right now in the mirror or in your camera, you're going to notice that your face is not perfectly symmetric. And that's fine, right? Because I'm sure everyone's seen like the celebrities and they'll go and like map the face out and they make it perfectly symmetric and it looks really weird. But if you started having a stroke and you had the face droop, right? And you had asymmetry from that, and someone came along and said, oh, that's just normal asymmetry, and didn't give you the medical attention you needed, right? You would die. And so minor asymmetry is fine, right? As long as the horse can be balanced and move without overloading or abnormally loading a joint, that asymmetry is fine. But when it becomes moderate to severe, which is what we're absolutely seeing in the saddle industry nowadays, then we get into a real problem because the shoulders really govern what we can do with the saddle. If you have a right shoulder that's further back, then that is going to push the saddle across the spine to the left. And no matter what you do, you're never going to be able to fix it. The fix is in the horse. Okay. All right. So we've got to move on. Let's go to the scapular cartilage. All right. As you can see in yellow, this is the scapular cartilage. I want everyone to reach up and feel the cartilage of your ear. This is exactly what the scapular cartilage feels like. It is just like this. It's 5 millimeters thick. It's just as flexible. It is also just as fragile. So I pierced the upper part of my ear when I was like 16, and my mom was like, she found it like 2 days later. I was not allowed to do it. And she told me to take it out. Okay, that was 34 years ago. I still have a hole, even though that earring was only in for 2 days. Okay, so this makes it very important for us to protect the scapular cartilage from the saddle. But I have news for you. No matter what we do, the tree point is going to sit on part of the scapular cartilage. It's up to us to figure out where is the least amount of damage going to happen. And I'm going to tell you. So what you'll notice is there's a 13 and a 15. I'm going to flip over here. The dorsal border, dorsal meaning top, of the scapular cartilage is inside the withers, and it serves as the attachment point for the rhomboids, which is a muscle that's in the withers. It is only covered by the thoracic trapezius muscle, which is a muscle in the withers. The thoracic trapezius muscle, as you're going to learn in a minute, is paper thin nowadays. It is not good protection for the dorsal border, which is 13. Okay. So we can't put the saddle in the withers. I feel like everybody knows that if they've even like been in horses for like 1 day. But when we go back to this, talking about the sides of the withers, this is why. 13, your dorsal border is in the sides of the withers. Okay. So now let's go to 15. This is called the caudal angle, right? So cranial would mean head, caudal means tail. And it's this little dog ear here, 15. It is located below the withers, and it is sandwiched between the latissimus and longissimus. And those two muscles I said earlier are the only weight-bearing muscles because they are associated with the rib cage. Okay? All right, going to move on. So the best choice for your tree point is going to be that it sits behind and reaches the caudal angle. If your tree point is too short and does not reach past the withers, you are sitting on the dorsal border, which is inside the withers. Okay. All right. So this is a necropsy photo here. All right. And then let me kind of preempt this. The horse is laying on its side with the head to the left of the screen. At the very bottom of the screen, this is the supraspinous ligament. And you can see I've got the dorsal border of your scapular cartilage labeled here. What I want you to notice is how far away the dorsal border is from the midline of the body. And so if we put our saddle too far forward, if we have a too narrow pommel, meaning well, you guys know what a too narrow pommel is, one that's really tiny, or if our tree points are too short to reach down to the longissimus, or they're too wide and they only put pressure on the withers, we are going to put pressure on this dorsal border because it's not held closely to the body like, oops, oh man, I didn't include that. All right, so the caudal angle is, hang on. Sorry, I have this included somewhere. Give me 1 sec, guys. I'm sorry. Is everyone doing okay?
Everyone's enjoying it so far, I think, from all the feedback
Perfect.
we see in the comments.
Okay. All right, perfect. Sorry, I had to unhide that. Okay, so here's your dorsal border, right? So not held closely to the body. It is, so for saddle fitting, the scapula has to be held closely to the body in order to prevent it whacking into the tree, right? So I guess that's what I wanted to say. And so the dorsal border is far away from the midline. Look at where the caudal angle is. That's this little dog ear that I've got labeled. And so the caudal angle is held very closely to the body. And we've got 3 reasons here why we can put it, right? One, it's sandwiched between the longissimus and the latissimus and the serratus thoracis muscle, which attaches into the fossa serrata. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back here and just show you, boop, share, present. Oh, let me do that. I'm sorry. We're just going to back up here. Okay. All right. So here's the fossa serrata. All right. And so the cranial toward the head is on the left side. The caudal is to the right. And you guys can see on the scapular cartilage that little kind of dog ear on the opposite side of where the arrow is. And so that little dog ear, the caudal angle, is located very close to the fossa serrata. And that is where the thoracic serratus literally just like holds that caudal angle into the horse's body really, really well. Really well. Okay. So that's the point I wanted to make here. We need the tree points to reach the caudal angle and not be so short that they only reach the dorsal border. Okay, next, we are going to just touch on fascia because it's super important. And I know the body workers are out here going, oh my God, yes, yes, yes. I have like 3 seconds to touch on it. It is going to be a huge part of the South African Symposium. Fascia is everywhere, okay? It surrounds your entire body. It creates all of the, it surrounds every muscle. It surrounds every organ. And we know now that it actually transmits pain signals almost better than nerves do. And it also transmits emotions. And it's one of the reasons why, like, if you guys have ever heard of fibromyalgia, when I was going through medical school, fibromyalgia was kind of like one of those catch-all things, and the American Medical Association didn't really understand it. And it was interesting because a lot of women had it. It was mostly women. And women were going to the doctor and they were going, my entire body hurts. And I can't explain it because I don't have any injuries. And the doctors would basically gaslight the women and be like, oh, you're drug seeking, you have anxiety, it's all in your head. And now we know that it's actually a disorder of the fascia. I think veterinary medicine is now starting to realize that horses also have disorders of the fascia. And I am not an expert on this. I just know from what I've been told that, like, if a horse doesn't want to be groomed all over its body, that's very abnormal, and we should be looking at fascia. When we put a saddle on, everyone knows what the fly twitch muscles are. They cover the whole entire body. When we put a saddle on, right, we affect the fascia, and the fly twitch muscles are connected. They connect the entire body with fascia, and it's very superficial. And so when we have bad saddle fit, when we have a girth that doesn't fit, when we have a girth that's over tightened, when we have like a neoprene girth, like just absolutely like rubbing the heck, like ripping the fascia, we start to see dysfunctions in the fascia, and that becomes body wide. And so it becomes an issue. So what you're seeing in this photo is the white is fascia. And it basically separates the muscles and it creates continuity in the body. And it's just so, so, so neat. This is my hand, and this is the thoracolumbar fascia. This is the origination of the latissimus muscle from the spine. It's a very thick sheet of muscle. It's very, very strong. You can put the saddle on it. It's just a really incredible piece of fascia. So, all right, next we're moving into the sternum, checking my time. We are going to run over, Haley. We're running over. We're so running over. How much can I run over?
Don't worry. I think we're all having a brilliant time. So just carry on going.
All right, carry on. All right, sternum. The sternum, everyone knows what a sternum is. It's in the front of your, like I can tap my sternum right now. All right, really, really, really important because it creates the cage that the ribs are, right? We create a cage for the heart and the lungs. Really important for life. Okay, what you'll notice is we've got the bony sternum, which is just that long piece. Your rib cartilages here, which have calcified. The manubrium is at the cranial end, right? So if you touch your neck and you go into, like, it's a notch right below your neck, that's that's the manubrium. And the xiphoid process is if you poke your sternum, you feel the bone. And if you're wearing a bra today, go underneath the breastband and keep poking in until you fall into a hole. Okay. And you'll go into a hole, push in, and it should hurt. Okay. And so go ahead and find that, because I'm going to ask you to find it in just a minute. So we're going to talk about the xiphoid cartilage and we're going to talk about girths. Okay. So this is just correct anatomy. The xiphoid process is at the caudal end, the manubrium's at the top. Okay. Let's just go back to the sternum really fast. So the sternum here, this red line going through the horse, okay, from the base of the wither straight down. From the base of the wither straight down is your xiphoid process. Cranial to that is going to be your sternum, and that sternum obviously goes all the way up into the front of the chest. What I want you to notice is we cannot put the girth on that xiphoid cartilage. I'm going to tell you why in a minute. We have a very small area for that girth to go. And if you guys have ever done any type of physics class, you understand that pressure equals force divided by surface area. And that's kind of a fancy way of saying that the greater the surface area, the reduced pressure we have. But we have to, and we use that for basically everything in saddle fitting, but we also have to respect the horse's anatomy. And so I don't want people going out and buying the biggest girth possible because they think, all right, well, the biggest girth means reduction of pressure. We still have to stay over the bony sternum. Okay, so let's go back to, right, we've got to stay on the bones because the bones are protected by the pectoralis muscle, which we will talk about. Okay, so we've got to sit on the bony sternum. And so we don't have a lot of area. We cannot sit on the xiphoid cartilage. We cannot go past T8, which is this arrow is starting at T8, right? So where this girth is the furthest back it can go. Why? All right, let's talk about the xiphoid cartilage. What you're looking at is a horse's skeleton, obviously. The head is to the top. You've got your ribs. And do you see that like kind of like circular shape in the middle? That's your xiphoid cartilage. So, all right, so now I want you to find the xiphoid cartilage on yourself. Push in, okay? Push in and try to take a deep breath. It's pretty hard because the diaphragm attaches to the xiphoid cartilage. All right, so now what you're looking at to the right of the screen is the xiphoid cartilage. You're looking into the horse. The white, like fibrous stuff is the diaphragm, okay? And you can see how it attaches into the backside of the xiphoid cartilage. The xiphoid cartilage is cartilage, feels just like your ear. It's flexible and fragile. Okay, this is my hand. We're looking at the same thing, right? So like you're seeing the diaphragm. And do you see how I can bend that xiphoid cartilage? All right, I'm gonna play it again. Right, so it's very, very easy to bend the xiphoid cartilage. Imagine if your girth sits on that. That's so dumb. We're going to talk about independent studies and the parameters that some of the independent studies have done when they were talking about, oh, it's okay if your girth gaps. It's okay if there's a big gap in the front. And it's okay if it puts all the pressure on the back edge of the girth. No, it's not. I don't have time to get into that today. This is going to be discussed in depth in South Africa. I hope you guys will join us. But basically what I want you to know is we cannot put pressure on that xiphoid cartilage, period. All right. So I've said all this, attachment for the diaphragm and abdominals. When you poked into your xiphoid cartilage, it was hard to breathe. We do not want to make it hard for the horse to breathe, okay? Breathing is really important. Everyone loves breathing. It's everyone's favorite hobby, right? The minute you stop breathing, life is over. All right. So we do definitely want to mind the gap. So what you're looking at is between the horse's forelegs, okay? And you can see that that girth is gapping. And so what ends up happening when the girth gaps in the front, it puts all the pressure in the back, and that is close to the xiphoid process, okay? Your girth is only as wide as what touches the horse, right? We do want to maximize surface area in the space that it can make pressure, right? So if your girth, like this girth is gapping in the front, it's really only making pressure for like an inch. Whatever pounds of force you're exerting is now on the xiphoid process and over 1 inch, right? So again, we're going to talk about that quite a lot. The girth groove, okay, this was my horse, very clearly has a girth groove that's very, very far forward. Every horse has its own unique girth groove. No matter what we do, the girth will not sit anywhere but the girth groove. And so the best way to keep a saddle in place is to put the front billet so it hangs straight into the girth groove. Okay, this was a horse I had. I don't know. I hope I never have to fit another horse like this, but you can very clearly see that the girth groove is in front of the scapula. We will be going over some tricks in order to fit horses like this. Um, this was a rough one. This was a rough. Okay, so 37 miracles in the Bible. None of them mention Jesus getting the girth to stay anywhere but the girth groove. And I feel like this is pertinent. I see people buying girths. I see people doing some really random stuff, trying to get the girth to sit somewhere else. It's just not going to, guys. The best thing you can do is design the saddle so that the girth hangs down into the girth groove. All right, muscles, blowing through these. All right, withers. This is the red triangle of death. If you put your saddle any pressure in this area, you will make your horse lame eventually. The issue becomes it's very insidious because scapular damage doesn't always show up right away. Many riders don't feel that the horse has inverted, right? They will feel if a saddle is too narrow because a too narrow saddle will generally pinch the latissimus. And as you can see here, the latissimus, you're going to learn it in a minute, is a major mover of the forelimb. And so when we pinch the latissimus, the horse takes a short step in the front and the rider goes, oh my God, this saddle is too narrow. They take the saddle off and it's a very small amount of time that the horse is ridden that way. When the saddle pinches the withers, the tops or the sides, because is primarily the rhomboids do move the scapula, but they're not a huge mover of the scapula. And so what ends up happening is the horse inverts, and then the rider, some riders are really on it, but a lot of riders aren't. And so the horse ends up going like that, and then the scapular cartilage gets damaged. These small muscles get damaged, the spine gets damaged, et cetera, et cetera. And now we've got a horse that looks like the one pictured. Okay, so we don't want that. We do not put any pressure in the red triangle of death. What is in the red triangle of death? The thoracic trapezius. So if you look at this, I put the trapezius group in here because I want to show opposition. I also want to say that, not to blow y'all's minds, we are going to talk about this in South Africa. And I do talk about this quite a bit on my page. We have bred the cervical trapezius, which is 57, the one in the neck. It no longer attaches to the spine of the scapula anymore. I'm not going to get into that. It's going to be a teaser. We think we know why it has evolved that way, and it has everything to do with the nuchal ligament. And I want to say that it is creating some issues with us in saddle fitting, because if you know anything about weightlifting, you have to have opposition in your muscles. If you're doing a bicep curl, meaning you pick up weight or you pick up a water bucket, you pick it up and your bicep contracts and your tricep, the opposite on the backside of your arm, relaxes. However, if you damage your tricep to the point where it can't work anymore, you will not be able to access your bicep muscle. And so, because the bicep needs opposition. And so the thoracic trapezius is no longer opposed by the cervical portion. I will talk about that a whole lot in South Africa. Okay. All right. So thoracic trapezius, this muscle is, the way that it looks here is correct. It has a more horizontal border here. And so it doesn't, like in a lot of old illustrations, it looks like the size of a house. It is not at all. And people go, oh, there's no way to avoid it. Yes, you can absolutely avoid it. I think I've got a picture in here that will show that. It inserts onto the spine of the scapula, okay, inserts on the scapula, and originates on the supraspinous ligament, aka the spine. Any weight on this is going to put weight on the supraspinous ligament and on the spine and everything deep to it. So we've got deep to this is the dorsal border of your scapular cartilage, your thoracic rhomboids, part of the stay apparatus, and the spinalis and the dorsal spinous processes. Okay, so it's very thin. This is my apprentice in Estonia, Hanna. She is holding the thoracic trapezius. The arrow is pointing to it, as compared to just a small portion of the longissimus. Because the thoracic trapezius is no longer opposed, it has become paper thin. It has basically shriveled up in most horses. It's designed to stabilize the dorsal scapula and hold it close to the body. Okay, what we're seeing is because it's not opposed anymore, it's having trouble doing that, and we're having trouble with saddle fitting because of that. All right, we're going to breeze through this. The horse's head is to the left. I've taken off the trapezius. The cervical and thoracic rhomboids are pointed. They've got the white arrows, right? So the cervical one is to the left, and the thoracic one is to the right. These attach to the backside, the costal surface, the medial surface of your scapular cartilage, and then originate onto the supraspinous ligament and the nuchal ligament. Okay, so what you need to know with this is they help move the scapula. They keep it close to the body. Okay, they move it cranially and dorsally, right? But most importantly, they are what we call adductors, meaning they add the forelimb to the body. They're located in the withers, and they attach to the scapular cartilage and the supraspinous ligament, right? The thoracic portion. And so any weight from the saddle on this muscle will put weight on the scapular cartilage. We know the scapula is not weight bearing, and the supraspinous ligament, not weight bearing. Okay. All right. Next, the rib cage. I think I said this already. We have to rest on the ribs. We can't do it anywhere else. Oh, sorry. I guess that one was just extra. Sorry. We're going to move in. Sorry. We're going to keep going. So next, we get into the dorsoscapular ligament. Okay. This was discovered in 2008. Interestingly enough, Animal Management, which was written in 1933, knew, I'm going to just forward this really fast, says in this quote, to ride on a horse's blade bones, meaning their scapulas, imperils the safety of his knees, a fact which must be remembered in considering the correct position for the saddle. Now, Animal Management, they rode in McClellan saddles. We're going to discuss the difference between Western and English trees and all that stuff. But they knew that putting the saddle either on top of the scapula or on the withers, which of course has a direct connection to the scapula, would cause the horse to trip and stumble, right? They didn't really know too much about this mechanism, and they definitely didn't know about the dorsoscapular ligament, which we didn't find until 2008. But as you can see, I'm going to go back to the actual necropsy here. In this picture, the supraspinous ligament is at the top, okay? My thumb is holding the scapula back, and I've cut away the rhomboids. So that's the muscle that's underneath my thumb there. And you see this white ligamentous sheet, right? That is what we call the dorsoscapular ligament. Dorso meaning top, scapular, right scapula. And it's the ligament, and now I'm going to fast forward over here, that attaches from the supraspinous ligament into the actual scapula and actually interdigitates with the serratus thoracis and runs down to the horse's knees. Okay, this is yet another reason we cannot put any weight on the sides of the withers. We talk about sleep. Let's talk about sleep. Okay, what is the stay apparatus? Stay apparatus allows the horse to sleep standing up, right? It also, and I'm gonna back up here just a sec. It also connects the shoulder, right, to the forelimb, right? And also to the entire body, to the rib cage, right, through the serratus thoracis muscle. I've said to you, there's no localization of injury in the horse, right? So when we talk about the withers and the shoulders and staying off of it is so, so important, because if the saddle pushes, even presses on the inside of the withers, we end up getting stay apparatus damage. And what that means is the horse will not be able to sleep standing up, and it will not want to lay down, right? You guys know how horses lay down. I actually have a video of a horse laying down that I'm going to play. Let's see if I can play it here. You guys are going to see all my photos. Rolling. Rolling. All right. So this is a healthy way to lay down. So he's going to go down on his knees, down on his butt, and on his shoulder. Okay. And he's going to put a lot of weight on his shoulder. Now, when they sleep, they're either going to sleep recumbent, which means on the shoulder, or they're going to sleep sternally. Okay. And so he's going to go down, boom, boom. And either they'll sleep on the shoulder or sternally. Right. That's very important because, again, the stay apparatus is part of the shoulder and it's attached to the rib cage, which means that's also sternum. If a horse will not lay down because they're too painful, imagine not sleeping. We see stuff like what's pictured right now very regularly here in the States because we have an epidemic of saddles that are, and I'm not saying that's the only reason, it's not, but I'm doing saddle fittings, so that's why I'm talking about it. We see an epidemic of sleep deprivation, and these unhealing fetlock sores are from horses that do not like, they don't want to get down on the ground because their scapulas hurt, their withers hurt, their sternums hurt. And what ends up happening is they start collapsing. They'll prop themselves up against a wall or a tree. They'll sleep with their head all the way down to the ground, which is absolutely abnormal. And then when they actually get down to the ground, they actually like prop themselves up on their fetlocks and cause abrasions like this, trying to get onto the ground in the least possible way. And people just don't understand it. This was actually a post, and she says, "Oh, it's a mysterious injuries. She lives with other horses. No other horse has these." And then the real clue here about the stay apparatus: she trips a lot when we ride. And if you've ever not slept for a couple of days, this is absolutely something we need to be advocating in teaching riders about. We're going to get into this very heavily in South Africa, but it's just yet another reason we can't sit on the sides of the withers. Also, for professionals and riders, issues with sleep deprivation is a major safety issue. I spent like 3 days not sleeping because I don't know, it's just, who knows? I was traveling or something, and I was so mean. And horses, they end up being very spooky. They can collapse on top of you. They can kick out, all of the things that nobody needs to get hurt. And so aside from being torture, it's a major safety issue as well. And again, here's a picture of a 5-star rider. This saddle is murdering the stay apparatus and the sides of the withers. And it's just unacceptable. We know too much now for that to be. All right, so red triangle of death, we do not touch this. There is another muscle in here called the spinalis. It's part of the erector spinae muscles. We're going to go through it when we do that. And we're going to move on here to the latissimus dorsi. Okay. All right, perfect. So latissimus, it's one of the 2L muscles that you can put the saddle on. It originates in thoracolumbar fascia. It is a superficial muscle. It dives under the triceps to go to the medial humerus. The medial humerus means the inside. It is an adductor. It adds the forelimb to the body. What you're going to notice is every muscle of the thoracic sling, every muscle is designed to keep that forelimb close to the body. The abductors, right, so the ones that bring the forelimb away from the body, are very small, like the deltoids, and they do not abduct, meaning to take away. They do not abduct the upper shoulder. That needs to stay very, very close to the body, which helps us as saddle fitters. Okay, so the latissimus here on this necropsy horse, what you need to know is it's nice and thick. Okay, so these are my hands. The caudal angle, right, of that scapular cartilage where we want the tree point to sit just behind and reach is cushioned by this thick latissimus. Okay, so major mover of the forelimb, very, very thick, good protection for the caudal angle of your scapular cartilage. And it is associated with the rib cage. I'm going to go back here because it sits on top of the rib shelf. Okay. All right. Erector spinae muscles. We have 3 of them: spinalis, which is the most medial, longissimus dorsi, iliocostalis. Spinalis, it only attaches to the spinous processes, and then, of course, in the transverse process of C4. Okay, sorry, I'm having a brain fart. Anyway, for our intents and purposes in saddle fitting, right, the spinalis is the biggest here at the withers. Why? Because the head and the neck weigh hundreds of pounds, and it's an erector spinae. It helps erect the spine in that area. It travels, let me see if I have a picture. It travels the length of the pelvis, like it goes from the neck to the pelvis, but it is the biggest at the withers, right? And so your gullet channel, your pommel, your tree points are all designed to get around the spinalis. We cannot put weight on this because it only attaches to the dorsal spinous processes, period, end of story. Oh, also half pads. If your half pad doesn't have a gullet channel the same width as the gullet channel of your saddle, which should be correct, then you are absolutely going to pinch this muscle. That is not good. It's not associated with the rib cage. It causes the horse to invert. And then we have damage. All right. All right. So the really cool thing is the trapezius and the spinalis, okay, have the same border. All right. There's a lot going on in this picture. The head is to the left, obviously. The trapezius has been reflected, right? So I brought the trapezius back so that you can see to the left here, just underneath it would be the thoracic rhomboids, and just below that would be the dorsal border of your scapular cartilage. The spinalis here is the deepest because it attaches to the spine, and then just south of that is the longissimus. And then you can see the caudal angle here. Now I'm going to go, it's like going to be a little flip book here. I'm going to bring the trapezius down, and you can see how the trapezius and the spinalis have a very similar border, and how the trapezius covers the dorsal border of your scapular cartilage. The longissimus is where the tree point needs to reach, and it has to get around the trapezius, thoracic rhomboid, spinalis. Okay. When we have a narrow pommel like this saddle, short tree points, meaning, and I'm not saying when people get very stirred up about short versus long, and people go, well, how long does a tree point need to be? It needs to be long enough to not put weight on the trapezius, thoracic rhomboids, dorsal border of your scapular cartilage, dorsoscapular ligament, spinalis, and distribute the weight of the front of the saddle, including the stirrup bar, to the longissimus and latissimus. That's how long it needs to be. The taller the withers, the longer it needs to be. The shorter the withers, the shorter it can be, right? But you got to keep in mind that pressure equals force divided by area. So the longer the tree point, the less pressure is distributed over that tree point, like per capita, right? So also, we need it to reach to the caudal angle of your scapular cartilage, period. All right, so what we're seeing here is a saddle that's pinching the sides of the withers. And my absolute favorite, and you guys can't see my face, I'm rolling my eyes, is those screws. You see that white ball on the inside? That's a screw. So I don't know why we're building saddles that have screws that can impact the spine, especially when we're building it with a narrow pommel and short tree points. I don't understand that, but we'll get into quite a lot of saddle design and saddle design issues in South Africa. Longissimus dorsi. This is the muscle the saddle sits on, your primary muscle. Runs from the base of the neck into the pelvis. There are several longissimus muscles. In saddle fitting, we're only dealing with the longissimus dorsi, okay? Now, this is why neck issues can show up under the saddle, is because it's all connected. This muscle runs the entire length of the horse's body. This is why sometimes you'll see the horse will go well on the lunge line, and you put a saddle on with the constriction of the girth, and they start going badly, and it shows up in the neck. You take the saddle off, and the horse goes, okay, thanks, I'm fine. And you put, people go, oh, it must be the saddle. Well, yes, it could be that saddle, but it could be any saddle. And so when we're looking at, is it that saddle or is it any saddle, you've got to start putting other saddles on and saying, well, does the horse do it with every saddle? Well, then maybe it's inside the horse and it's any saddle that's doing it. Okay. So when you eat a ribeye, you are eating the longissimus dorsi muscle. So this is a nice tomahawk steak, very yummy. And this is another quote from Animal Management, just saying that the longissimus is the muscle that the saddle rests. And from a saddle fitting point of view, it is the most important muscle in the body for us as saddle fitters. What does that mean? If the longissimus isn't healthy, or even we've all seen horses with terrible dips behind the scapula. If the horse doesn't have a sufficiently healthy longissimus, he can't support the weight of the saddle, period. End of story. And that's just the reality. The purpose of the tree is to distribute the weight of the saddle and the rider onto the longissimus, and of course the latissimus, because the latissimus sits on top of that. Because the tree distributes the weight, if the tree doesn't reach the longissimus, meaning the tree points or the twists or the bars, it's not going to distribute the weight to it. That's like building a house and only having the frame go halfway through the house and then trying to build the rest of the house with no frame. The frame distributes the weight of the house onto the foundation. Okay, so in this analogy, the house is the saddle, the frame is the tree, and the foundation is the horse's back. You would never build a house on a foundation that wasn't very even and very hard, right? If you built a house on a soft sand, your house would fall apart. And so in what we see in saddle fitting right now is people don't realize what's healthy and not. And we're just throwing saddles, and then we're having saddle fit issues. And then, it's like we're not realizing the true cause of it. Okay. So the longissimus, when it's healthy, is really thick. These are my hands. And it's sometimes 8 inches. And so it's should be a very, very thick muscle that sits between the vertebrae and the rib shelf. We can put the saddle in this when it is healthy. Okay. What I want you to see here is the yellow line, right? So the longissimus follows the rib cage and goes down into the base of the neck, the longissimus dorsi. Okay. Neck and hip issues can mimic saddle fit issues. Saddle fit issues can exacerbate neck and hip issues because it's all connected. All right. This horse has a well-muscled longissimus. All right. Why? Because you should never be able to visualize the scapular cartilage. The shoulders should never protrude from the body. All of this, the horse's body should just be very well-rounded. And so like this horse, I would hop on and ride bareback all day long. And that, to me, that's kind of my guiding light, is like, this horse is quite healthy. She's also used to be a patient at the rehab facility. We followed her for several years. And so we know what's going on in this horse's body. And this horse came to us with horribly protruding shoulders, big scapular dips, very angled through the back, very dropped in the back. And she's done an excellent job rehabbing the horse and keeping her fit. And so this is what you're seeing. Now you're going to see a difference. All right. This horse very clearly has no longissimus. And I'm going to tell you, stereotypes don't happen in a vacuum. This horse had a saddle that was sitting right on the withers, short tree points that were way too wide. You can clearly see the imprint of the saddle in the horse's back. The longissimus is gone. The horse is very angular. And just we can't saddle fit this back. No matter what you did to the saddle, you're always going to have saddle fit issues because there's no foundation. Okay. So now we're going to get in really, really quick, the multifidus and the iliocostalis. The iliocostalis is to the lower part of your screen here, the yellow arrow that's below. Look at how cool it is. It's like segmented, and you can see the arrows go opposite ways. And so the iliocostalis is this very thin muscle that's the most lateral of the erector spinae muscles. And then what you're seeing on top is the multifidus. It's not an erector spinae muscle. It's just there to stabilize the spine and provide proprioception. This is why we need a gullet channel. Well, not just the only reason, but that's a major reason. And so, but it's really cool because the multifidus is the most medial, right? Stabilizing the spine there. And the iliocostalis is the most lateral. They're both segmented and they run opposite ways. And to me, this is just like the coolest thing ever. But it also highlights the fact that the horse's spine is doing everything in order to stabilize it. And so when we talk about going in with kissing spine surgery and doing things to destabilize the back, we're going to get into this in South Africa. The horse has a horizontal spine that we're putting vertical weight of the saddle on and adding constriction, right? And then putting a rider's weight on. When we go in and destabilize the spine with kissing spine surgery, we can create a lot of problems unless we have a very, very adequate prehab and a super adequate rehab that continues for the rest of your horse's life. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. I just want to let you know that the iliocostalis is very thin. We're going to talk about this in South Africa, where the iliocostalis is not weight bearing over the false ribs because this runs along the side of the rib shelf. You see the line? Do you see the line just above the end of the white arrow? That's the end of the rib shelf. That's your longissimus. The iliocostalis sits just lateral to that. And so underneath the cantle of the saddle and kind of where the rider's bum is, it's not weight bearing because those are the false ribs, and we can't sit on the sides of the false ribs, which means that your saddle, like this whole super size me thing about having like the widest panels possible, it's actually a bad thing. We don't need the panels to be wider than the longissimus muscle. Where I've got the box here is the true ribs. And so the iliocostalis is weight bearing over the true ribs because we can put weight on the sides of the true ribs. This is the only reason we can use a girth. So, a little trivia there. All right, moving on. Iliocostalis, this is a pretty good fitting saddle, and the iliocostalis is in the dotted lines here. All right, moving on to the most important serratus group. This is the most important thoracic sling muscle. You've got a cervical and thoracic component. Remember, they come into the fascia serrata on the costal surface of that scapular cartilage. Or sorry, not scapular cartilage. The fascia serrata of the scapula on the costal surface of the scapula. Excuse me. It's called the serratus because it has a serrated appearance. Excuse me, I just need some water. How are we doing, Haley?
So well, the best comment I've had is, "This is like Christmas. Please keep going."
Mm. Mm. Good, good. Okay. So the serratus has a serrated appearance. Why? Because it attaches into the ribs, right? So like all of these ribs. Now, the serratus is there to kind of help open the ribs and allow for the rib cage to expand so that the horse can take a deep breath. In South Africa, we're going to talk about what happens to the horse's ability to breathe when they have a dysfunctional thoracic sling. It is bad news all around. But we're going to also talk about how to prevent that. Okay, here's the fascia serrata again, right? This is where they attach. And so the most important thing is that the dorsal scapula does not move like a windshield wiper. It moves very, very little at the top of the scapula, has much more motion below at the scapulohumeral joint because of this serratus muscle. So here's the cervical and thoracic component. You can see them coming into the costal or medial surface of that scapula, and they should be equal in size, well, not size, but strength, right? And like, well, strength and quality, right? To each other in order to balance that scapula. When the thoracic, when the thoracic sling is dysfunctional, what you're going to start to see is an imbalance in the opposing muscles. So you're going to see like what we call hypertrophy or abnormal muscle growth in the thoracic portion. And then you're going to see the hole in the neck in the cervical area, right? And then what you're going to see is, of course, your cervical rhomboids are just above that. You're going to see hypertrophy, like very, very tight cervical rhomboids, and then atrophy in the thoracic rhomboids, which are in the withers. And so it's almost like a battery, right? Like you'll have the negative, positive. What we need is for the cervical and thoracic components of every muscle that is in the thoracic sling to be equal. That way they balance the scapula and hold it close to the body. The scapula has to be held close to the body. When you see it protrude, the horse's back is dropped. They cannot access their core. It makes it very hard to breathe for them. And now that was all fact. This is my opinion. This is why I think we see horses panicking in the dressage arena. We have the highest trained horses on the planet doing FEI. And you see them absolutely having explosions. Of course, it's not the only reason, but it's a big reason because I do a lot of scuba diving, and I had an issue with getting any air out of my tank, and I don't know, there's something happened. Maybe I didn't turn it on right or whatever, but I get down to where I'm going and I start panicking because I'm not getting the air that I need. And I'm in a situation, I mean, everyone needs to breathe. And so when we have a horse with a dysfunctional thoracic sling, they can't access their core, their back is dropped, they're having trouble breathing, they're going to panic. And so this makes it very, very important for riders to be, one, aware of riding only healthy backs, but also recognizing when the horse's back is dropped, and getting off and doing what's necessary in order to get that functional again before we start riding. Okay, so this is, God love it. This is an advertisement, and it's showing the scapula doing this like crazy back and forth motion, right? Listen, we just talked about the thoracic sling. I'm going to just kind of back up really quick. Do you see where the thoracic portion and the cervical portion attach into that dorsal scapula, especially the cervical, right? we would have to cut every neck muscle off in order for the scapula to move like this. Okay, this is dumb. Not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but like this is misinformation and it's just designed to sell stuff. The scapula does not move like this. It does not move like a windshield wiper. Okay. It can't, we would never be able to ride a horse like this. And if you've ever like actually tried to create an AI version of a horse that moved like this, it was like an alien. You would never be able to ride a horse. It'd be crazy. So the scapula does not move like this. I think I have a good, I've got a good video in just a sec. Okay. What we're seeing here, the horse's head, I've kind of flipped it around. The horse's head is to the right. You can see the thoracic serratus, the serrated things kind of to the left lower screen. The circle, the black circle, is where they insert into the backside, the costal surface on the fascia serrata, okay? The lats here is lower right, and that's pulled back. Your pivot point is that fascia serrata. Okay, so this is me moving the scapula. All right, head is to the top. Greg, my assistant, is holding the latissimus back here. The caudal angle, right, is where his top hand is. The latissimus just went down onto the caudal angle. It's protecting the caudal angle as we rotate. What you're seeing is that the scapula is not doing, I mean, this is a dead horse and it's not in rigor. And we are absolutely cranking the leg as much as possible. Okay. And so you're not seeing a windshield wiper movement. All right. And then and the beauty of that is the latissimus flips down on that caudal angle and protects it from the tree. All right. Really cool. We're going to go. Okay. All right. We're going to touch on the pectoralis, the ascending pectoralis. It's the muscle that is underneath the girth. When the horse lifts its back, you guys have all done flies, right? To do chest presses, flies, whatever, right? You do that and your pecs get bigger and it protects your sternum. Again, that's one of the muscles of the thoracic sling. That's what the girth goes over. These help protect the sternum when the horse's back is lifted, okay? Lateral thoracic nerve, this is really important when we get into eventers and dressage and Western riders. This is a very superficial nerve that comes off of the brachial plexus, okay? So if you guys have ever heard of like your funny bone, I don't know why they call it funny, because when I hit my elbow, I want to murder somebody. It hurts so bad. So when we girth a horse up, okay, in this area here is the lateral thoracic nerve. When your girth buckles are too short, when you have an anatomic girth that gaps and puts more pressure on the back side of the girth or the front side of the girth, you're going to put uneven pressure on this nerve. Let me flip here. So the middle of this picture, it kind of looks like a yellow bundle. That is the nerve bundle that we're talking about. Okay, it's very thick. It's very, very superficial. And if anyone's a girl here, I can't see you guys because I get very nervous public speaking. Girls, if you've worn an underwire bra, you understand how uncomfortable metal is against a nerve, because we also have one of these. Okay. So how high do we want our girth buckles to be? We want them to be as high as possible. Okay. We want to get above that lateral thoracic nerve. We actually want to get into the belly of the serratus, above the rib cartilages as well, because cartilage is very, very sensitive to and easily damaged. Right. Okay. So here's how we test for the lateral thoracic nerve. I'm going to be teaching this in South Africa. Okay. You're going to take one finger right behind the elbow and kind of press in, and you see how the horse reacts, right? Some horses will react a lot. Some horses will only react a little, but the girth buckles and it must be above that. And they also must be well protected. Okay. So we need even front to back and no, it can't gap anywhere. Okay. All right. Abdominals. There's my Henry. All right. We're going to go basically really, really quick. The abdominals oppose the top line muscles. Okay. Their purpose for the horse, right, is to rotate the hips so that they can bring their lower legs underneath them to create thrust. If the horse's back is tight because the saddle's pinching, the shoulder is damaged, they don't have enough back muscle, right? Like when they don't have enough back muscle, weak muscle is tight muscle. And tight muscle does not expand and contract like healthy muscle. And so when the back gets weak, it gets tight, the hips anteriorly rotate, the gut falls down, and the horse cannot access its core. And therefore, the horse can't create thrust from behind. It becomes a whole thing, okay? So the abdominals are super important. We're going to touch on this a lot in South Africa. I can't do it today because I'm already a half hour over. A half hour? Maybe an hour over. Anyway, all right, really quick. My horse is girthy, but we've checked everything. I have heard this, I can't tell you how many times, and the only thing they've checked is they've checked for ulcers, they bought a new girth, and they bought a new saddle, okay? Or they've changed saddles, and the horse is persistently girthy. And this is where fatigue comes in. People will just give up because they think that is it, okay? Here is what everything actually is. From that black arrow, right? You've got a list of things that anything could be. Now, we can't image all of that. There's no way. But what I want people to stop thinking about is that when a horse is girthy, it can only be the saddle, it can only be the girth, and it can only be ulcers. We've seen many horses with fractured ribs. We've seen many horses with inflammation and fractures of the sternum. And we have to start thinking outside the box, and start being really proactive when we talk about horse welfare, because it's not like we have to ride our horse to work anymore. We don't. This is a luxury sport, and we are about to lose our social license to operate it. And we don't want to do that because then the horses will truly suffer. And so I just want to get everybody kind of on the same page. We all need to be very proactive in going, hey, if my horse is girthy, I'm going to check on why, because it could be a lot of things. And so we can check on the things that we know about. All right, biomechanics is the study of the movement of the body. We are going to go into this like crazy in South Africa, okay? And then if the equipment we are using is suitable for the job it was designed to perform, okay? If you are a show jumper, you are not going to go buy a Western saddle. You're not going to use, it's not going to work. And vice versa. If you're only a trail rider and you go for long hours, in the mountains and whatnot, a jump saddle is not the thing that you should buy. And so I think people forget that everything has a purpose and everything has a parameter. And so riders understanding how they want to sit, what they're going to do with their horse, their body type, their horse's body type, and then buying the saddle that is going to fit that is going to give them the best thing for success. If you are going to go run a race, like a marathon, right? Nobody starts doing anything and goes, I want to fail at this. And so what you're not going to do if you're going to run a marathon, you're not going to wear a wetsuit. You're not going to put high heels on. You're not going to not eat breakfast, right? You're going to train. And so, but I think in horses, either we don't know because we're confused, right? Like the marketing says, oh, just buy this because it's good for every horse. And people need to really start thinking about what actually is good for them and for their horses. And it's going to help you understand why the horse may or may not be going well. What you're looking at here are two riders that look very similar, unless you know what to look at. What you're seeing here, we're going to go through in a couple more slides. These two riders are both dressage riders, but they are sitting in very different locations on the horse's back. Their legs are in a completely different position on the horse's sides. They are exerting weight on the horse's back, pressure distribution, very, very, very differently. And so you can say, oh, it's just a dressage saddle, but one horse is going to have a problem and one horse hopefully won't. So let's just keep going. All right. One of the things we need to think about in biomechanics is center of gravity. The next time you go get feed for your horse, okay, and you're carrying that feed bag in, think about where you put it. If you're smart, you're going to hold it right up against your trunk. I would encourage you that when you're carrying it, just for a couple of steps, to pick up that feed bag and move it just 1 inch away from your trunk. And then you'll see how you're going to struggle, okay? And so it's the same with horses. For our intents and purposes today, yes, the center of gravity is located approximately on the heart girth line, like on the sternal area. Does it move? Sure. It moves a little bit forward when the horse is galloping and further back when the horse is in piaffe or passage, but not that much. and not enough to be like, oh, we can sit on T18 far away from the center of gravity. We want to put the rider as close as possible to that center of gravity, right? Think about it like the feed bag that you're going to carry in. That your rider, you, the rider, or a saddle fitter, or you're as a trainer, the rider needs to sit over the anticlinal vertebrae at the base of the withers, which will put you as close as possible to the horse's center of gravity. This is the easiest way that the horse is going to be able to carry you, right? The whole purpose, the way that we prevent injuries is to make it easy for the horse to carry us. When you make it hard for the horse to carry you, then they get injured faster. And horses already like to get injured. We don't want that, okay? So the center of gravity is also the balance point. So this is an airplane that was loaded improperly, right? And so there was actually a terrible, there's a terrible accident in Afghanistan several years ago where they loaded the aircraft with some like Humvees, some cargo tanks or whatever, and they didn't secure them properly. And the airplane took off and the load shifted and it caused the airplane to crash. And it was awful. And it's on YouTube. I wouldn't watch it if you get triggered. But basically that highlights what the rider needs to be doing in the saddle, meaning the rider needs to be staying right with the horse in a balanced fashion, right close to the center of gravity, right? Especially if you're an eventer or you're jumping. What we don't want to do is be sliding all around that saddle, especially when they're in the air or they're getting ready to take off or they're getting ready to land. That's what causes injuries. So anyway, center of gravity is really important. When you go backpacking, the heaviest part of the backpack is closest to your trunk. You can see that in the red, and then you pack it accordingly. Otherwise, you're going to end up tipping over backwards. Okay. Same with carrying anything, right? This is a heavy saddle. I had this girl carry the saddle around with it close to her trunk on the left. She was fine. She walked around that barn just fine. I made her move the saddle away from her center of gravity, and she literally took 5 steps. She was like, I can't do this. Let's sit close to the horse's center of gravity. Okay. So leg at the girth. All right. Why do we need our leg at the girth? All right. Leg at the girth on every single book that you read about riding says when you want to bend the horse around your leg needs to be at the girth. This is just innate because the horse does not bend through the thoracic spine. Can't, right? You've got the rib cage that prevents that motion. The axis of bend here is just behind the scapula. And so when we put our leg on at the girth, that naturally tells the horse to bend around the leg. What ends up happening is if your leg can't get to the girth because you've got a block in the way or the saddle has put you too far back, now the horse is just moving the haunches, right? And now you've got to unbalance the horse in order to get him to bend around. We're going to talk about that quite a lot. Okay, so let's get to where do you want to sit and riding style differences. Okay, so again, 2 very, very different saddles, 2 very, very different ways of sitting. The rider on the left in the blue is sitting in the middle of the seat with her leg at the girth. She's actually in pee-off, so she's moved her leg back a little bit, but her leg could easily be at pee-off. The rider on the right is sitting at the back of the tree against the cantle with her leg nowhere near the girth. Now, I'm not judging here at all. What I'm saying is these are dressage saddles. And when you're a rider, if you're a trainer, if you're a saddle fitter, right, it's important to understand the differences in design because these 2 horses, as you're about to see, are going to feel very different commands and they are going to feel the pressure on their backs very differently. Okay. So this rider here sits at the back of the tree because the block is pushing her back and the deepest part of the seat is up against the cantle. We have to add a point billet. That's the billet that comes out of the front to this saddle design because of the rider's position. I will discuss this in South Africa. This saddle is going to exert 100% even pressure from pommel to cantle based on the billet arrangement, right? You've got a very far forward billet and the back billet comes out of as far back of the saddle as possible. And then you've got the rider's weight, okay? Whether you think that's a good thing or not, we'll start critically thinking about that. The leg is going to be far from the girth. She's not going to be able to get her lower leg to the girth to cue the horse, okay? because her leg is very, very straight, there's very little bend in the knee, her lower leg, and she's pushed back on the horse's barrel, her leg is over the widest part of the barrel. So her lower leg is not touching the horse, right? So, and I'm going to show you a schematic here in a minute. This position is created by the saddle. She's not going to be able to move because the saddle is putting her in this position, okay? This is just part of a saddle design. Okay, this is basically the position that she's in. When you stand over a barrel, this is what happens. It is what it is. All right, so this type of riding, Haley, this is for you. There are two types of riding, two primary types of riding that we have all evolved from. This is called la brida, meaning, and that's Spanish for the bridle. It is a riding style that evolved from heavy cavalry, meaning like the knights in armor with lances and javelins. And so these warriors would be on heavy horses in armor with these really heavy lances. And this position here, where you can see the rider with a very straight leg, and he's between a pommel, a very high pommel and a very high cantle, is a position of bracing so that he can hit something with impact, right? Like the lance, he was obviously trying to bear down on his enemy with a lance. And so this is where this type of saddle is coming from, in this type of position, okay? There's no judgment. It's just, it is what it is. Okay, so the next is the pressure distribution on the back with that saddle is going to be 100%. So you can see the arrows going down. We've got 100% at the shoulder, 100% where the rider in the middle of the saddle, and 100% at the back of the cantle, right? So we're putting equal amount of pressure on the shoulder, in the middle of the back, and at the cantle in that La Brida pressure distribution, all right? So you'll see saddles like this. They'll have a point billet and a V-strap, right? So we're creating 100% pressure distribution across the board. Next is the second rider. This rider sits in the middle of the tree, okay? This type of saddle, you're going to have four fingers behind your bum, you know, that four-finger thing, where the rider is sitting forward of where the tree comes off the horse's back. This allows us, if the horse's anatomy allows us to do this, if the horse doesn't have a forward girth groove, to have centered billets, okay? Which allows the saddle to be lighter in the front under the tree points and lighter at the cantle. So most of the rider's weight, it's like 20% under the pommel, 60% under the rider, and then 20% of the weight under the cantle. It allows the scapula to have a bit more freedom and the loins to have a bit more freedom. The leg will be positioned at the girth, and the entire leg will be wrapped around the barrel, with the rider placing most of the weight over the upper thighs, whereas the other rider is going to put it mostly in the stirrup bars. This rider is as far forward as we can possibly get her. If I took that saddle away, she would be sitting exactly in the same position. She would be bareback. There's going to be a bend in the knee. And this type of saddle, the rider's position is going to be created by the rider, not by the saddle. So if she needs to move her leg forward to access the girth, if she needs to move it back, et cetera, this saddle is going to allow her to do that. Okay, and this stems from, and this is the schematic on a barrel. This is what they look like. Okay, this stems from, this is Genghis Khan. It actually comes, they surmise it probably started in the 700s. It comes from the light cavalry. So the cavalry that was allowing the horses to move very quickly left to right. They were fighting with swords. They were fighting with lighter weapons. The horses had to do very fast maneuvers, capriole, like all, I mean, dressage comes from war. And so they were doing all these dressage movements in order to protect the rider, and actually the horses were weapons themselves. All right, I'm going to go back here. So for the La Brida here, they had a heavy lance that was quite long. And so, yes, these horses could change direction, but imagine a knight carrying a heavy lance in one arm. That horse, you know, changing direction fast is going to unbalance everything. So the heavy cavalry, like the La Brida, was really designed to go in a straight line and not do a ton of side to side motion. This was literally like the shock and awe, like they're bearing down on you and they're going to take you out. That's the first wave. And then this next style, which is called, let me get to it, La Jineta, spelled with a J. If anyone's from Spain, sorry if I murdered that, but La Jineta, which comes from the Jinet horses, that was used. That's just what it's called. We can get into it in South Africa. Anyway, this has a bend in the knee, a bit shorter of a stirrup. The rider is sitting on the horse's back with most of the weight on the thighs. The whole leg is wrapped around. These riders were fighting with both of their hands. They'd have a shield and a sword or a bow and arrow. And so they were commanding their horse with their legs and their seat. Whereas with labrida, which means the bridle, the knight was standing in the stirrups. Their lower legs were far away. They were standing, so they really couldn't use their seat, and they would use the bridle to command the horse, right? And their other hand was on the lance. So, this is the cool history of our riding styles. And so this is a Mongolian saddle. And what you're seeing here is that the rider is sitting in the middle where the red wood here is the bar. And that allows the front of the bar to be lighter and the back of the bar to be lighter. And the rider to sit in the middle. Let's see. And so the pressure distribution on the back, as I said before, for La Jineta is about 20% of the weight at the shoulder, 60% under the rider, and 20% under the cantle, which allows the horse to move quickly, right, left, access its shoulders, access its loins, because the horse really is designed to carry us at the base of the withers. And so the old school style of riding here is kind of a hybrid form of La Jineta. It's basically, they've lengthened their stirrups a bit. And as this guy is doing an extended trot, his leg is a little bit more forward. All you would have to do is bend his knee to bring it back into your shoulder hip heel. We're going to discuss your shoulder hip heel like crazy in South Africa. I don't have enough time to get into it, but we'll definitely talk about that. All right. So this is the rider. Are you good, Haley?
All good.
Okay. All right. I'm almost done. Okay. So this is the rider who is in Piaf, and there's a guy up here on top. He's in bareback. These two riders are sitting identical. The guy on top is doing a hand gallop, so his leg is a little bit more forward. The lady on the bottom is doing a Piaf. Her lower leg is a bit more back. But as you can see, they're sitting in the exact same location. Their thighs are in the same. Their thighs are in the same angle, and their entire leg is wrapped around the horse's back. This is the closest thing to bareback, the La Jineta, that you can get. And basically you can really influence the horse with your thighs. Very, very different than labrida, which is what we see in popular dressage today. And again, no judgment. We will discuss it anatomically even further for critical thinking in South Africa. But as a rider, as a saddle fitter, as a vet, as a buddy worker, especially as a rider, you have to choose how you want to sit on your horse. And you also have to choose who fits your saddle, because you buy a saddle that is more like the saddle on the bottom in this picture, and a saddle fitter doesn't understand this, and they only understand the labrida type pressure distribution, then you may have some issue, and vice versa, of course. If your saddle fitter only understands La Jineta and you have a labrida, they might be like, oh, there's way too much pressure here and here. So, now we're talking about the nuances, but what ends up happening is you can start having problems because horses are very specific in where they want pressure, which we will absolutely discuss in South Africa. All right, last slide is the saddle. Here it is. The saddle is a symmetric object designed to sit on healthy top line muscle. This is the beginning and end to the problems and solutions of saddle fitting. If your horse is healthy, you can get away with a lot. If your horse is not healthy, you can't get away with anything. And so in South Africa, we are going to combine all of the anatomy much more in depth, much more biomechanics, much more riding styles, and then start equating them to saddle design. Everything from the tree, the gullet plate, the pommel, the stirrup bars, extended stirrup bars, thigh blocks, billet position, rails, reinforcement, flexibility, rigidity, panels, types of flocking, why the rider, needs to sit in a very specific place on the tree in order to diffuse kinetic energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, thank you for sticking with me. I know it's been 2 hours instead of just an hour. And so we will have 5 full days of, oops, how do I stop? Here we go. Sorry, I'm gonna stop sharing. Hang on. We're gonna have 5 full days of this. I think we're doing it just in the morning, right, Haley? So that you guys can go watch other stuff. I also want to watch other people. So I think we're doing it in the morning in South Africa. And then that way it's just half a day. Anyway, thank you for joining us, everyone. I appreciate you.
If you guys are interested in booking for Amanda's clinic, the link will be on the website tonight to book your tickets for the lessons or the workshops. And it's an individual ticket for every day. And then there's a group ticket for the 4 days in full, which I would recommend because you can see how amazing this is. It's something that I find really interesting, and I think that everyone should know. Um, Being able to have the choice of what you're doing with your horse and how you decide to ride, I think is really important. And it's not a choice that we should have someone else make for us. So, um, yeah, have a good evening, everyone. I will send you the email with the replay. I will send you in that email the link to book. And if you are not in South Africa and you still want to come, then you can still come and we'll have accommodation and everything set up. So if you're not in South Africa, just message me. Cool. Have a great evening. Good
Perfect.
night.
Thanks, everyone.